Hello, I'm Jenny Klochko. Welcome to the podcast, the platform for guest stories beyond your daily newsfeed. Today, I would like we discuss nuclear weapon and its role on the global politics. My guest today is Marianna Budjeryn. She's senior research associate at Harvard Belfer Centre, one of the top world's experts on nuclear weapons, Soviet and post-Soviet, and I would say she's number one on Budapest Memorandum, and author of the fantastic book I read, I highly recommend. It's Inherited the Bomb. And this book very soon will be available in Ukrainian. So my Ukrainian audience, welcome to check on in your bookshops and to enjoy it. You will get lots of insight like I did when I read it. Mariana, welcome back to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and thank you, Jenny, for inviting me back.
Mariana, what's your take on the recent events in the context of the nuclear weapon and the 12 days war between Israel, Iran, and US role in it as well?
Well, there's a lot to be said. We nuclear experts, of people who study these things, have been watching very closely all these developments. This is what we called in the field counter-proliferation policy, right? Or counter-proliferation measures. So, in a way, to prevent proliferation of nuclear weapons to states, to around the world, to more states. Certain actors in the international system, normally it's the United States, but also Israel has been historically rather active in this arena, have in the past conducted strikes against nuclear facilities of other countries. In the past, Iran conducted strikes against Iraqi nuclear facilities during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. And then Israel also conducted strikes against Iraqi nuclear facilities. I think it was in 1981 or 82, the Osirak reactor. And then Israel also in the past conducted strikes against Syrian nuclear facilities, right? And before, and most recently has been kind of trying to sabotage and undermine Iranian nuclear programs. So this is not something unprecedented in international politics. We've seen these kinds of things happen before. What is unprecedented, what is new, is just the scale of the operations, also the involvement of the United States as Israeli ally, but also as as an actor in international system that has been historically to basically curb other nations' nuclear weapons programs. In the past, the United States have not always been successful, right? You had countries like North Korea succeed in developing a nuclear bomb, India, Pakistan, right? Although in India and Pakistan's case, nobody any military actions against their program. And so now we see these two operations in Iraq. So that's sort of to put it into a historical perspective. Now, in terms of the actual consequences of this, they are kind of in the making. We're still not sure exactly how this will impact the long-term prospects of Iranian nuclear program, both civilian and military. To begin with, I mean, clearly Iran has nuclear weapons ambitions, despite everything that they're saying, that it's for peaceful purposes only and so forth. The tricky part here is to understand that actually the enrichment of uranium and reprocessing of plutonium, so the fabrication of nuclear fuel, is not prohibited in and of itself by any international treaties, norms, laws, anything like that. So say the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons doesn't say you can't enrich nuclear material. It has no such clause, right? The problem there is, of course, that the same process that is used to fabricate fuel for civilian purposes is also the process that is used to fabricate fuel for military purposes. So this is where the role of the IEA becomes very important, right? As a non-nuclear weapon state, Iran and party to the NPT, to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Iran has a so-called safeguards agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. That means they declare all of their civilian nuclear facilities with the agency. They say facilities. And then regularly, then the IEA sends their inspectors, and this is one of the tasks of the agency, to make sure that in this process that's not prohibited, right, by any international laws, the process does not divert nuclear material towards military purposes, right? And they have to testify to that to the Board of Governors and to the basically international community. So that's why it's somewhat I don't like that impression, but that expression, but that's why they call it the nuclear watchdog. Of course, the IAEA's mission is much broader than that, and I would say it does them a disservice to be called the watchdog. But partially it's true in that way, right? So this is the only sort of international legal recourse to make sure that states do not abuse this technology that's used for civilian purposes and divert it towards military ends. Now, with Iran, uh, enriching uranium to 60%, there's no civilian needs for that at all. There's no civilian nuclear reactor, say the kind that, nuclear power plant, or even a research reactor. I mean, research reactors require very little nuclear material, right? So they could, some of them work on highly enriched uranium up to 80, even 90%, for nuclear, for research purposes, scientific purposes. But these kind of vast quantities of highly enriched uranium, there's no civilian need for that. Most civilian reactors, the ones that produce electricity, right, nuclear power plants, they work on uranium fuel that's enriched to about 5-6% maximum. That's all. That's low enriched uranium. Now, some of the newer generation reactors, those we call small modular reactors, are designed to run on 19.9, so up to 20% enrichment, right? But that's also just 20%, right? That still qualifies as low enriched uranium. Everything over 20% is considered high enriched uranium, but not all high enriched uranium is weapons grade uranium. So only once you get to 90% enrichment, that's your weapons grade uranium that could be used for, a fuel within a nuclear warhead. So Iran was kind of in that gray zone. It didn't have weapons grade uranium yet, although it was very, very close. So it was true that it was probably a couple of weeks work to enrich that 60% uranium that they had, 400 kilograms, which is quite a bit, to 90%. And then they would have that fuel that could be used for nuclear weapons. And so I think because they were kind of close to that benchmark, Israeli government decided to move, right? That this is the point of vulnerability of any state that tries to kind of proliferate or play with a nuclear program, is once you get close enough, but you still don't have that nuclear weapon or enough nuclear material that you can then squirrel away and start building that nuclear weapon. So this kind of explains the timing of these strikes. And then, of course, the United States followed up by showing solidarity with its ally, but also, for its own purposes, for its own goals of impeding Iran from developing a nuclear bomb. Now, we watched these strikes on TV. They were quite impressive. These majestic B-2s dropping these enormous, what are the massive ordnance penetrators, MOPs, 30,000-pound bombs, with this absolute precision, one after another, busting bunkers and all this underground infrastructure at the Fordo. I mean, tactically, it was a very and there's no doubt that these, Israeli and U.S. bombings did set back the Iranian program quite a bit. And they did, kind of scale it down significantly. There was significant damage. However, we actually don't know what survived, and that's the $1 million bomb question. There's numerous reports that the 400 kilograms of the 60% enriched uranium has been squirreled away, has been removed, and clearly it would make every sense. If you know the facility is getting bombed, you would move that. And there's some satellite imagery showing trucks coming into some of these facilities, both Natanz and Fordo, to try and move this material away. There's probably some centrifuges that are left, or elements of centrifuges, which is the equipment that's used for enrichment. So there might be some capacity, not just the material, but the capacity to produce more that could be more or less easily reconstituted. And there's institutional infrastructure, and there's the human aspect. Now, Israel assassinated many Iranian nuclear scientists, painful, meaningful, difficult to get there, not the weapon bench, and you need to train these people, you need to enlist them into your program and so forth. So that could be actually one nuclear program. We don't know what's left of that human capacity of the people who were involved in the program. But I think it is fair to say that a lot is, the program has not been wiped out. It has not been obliterated. So there are some elements left. Plus, following these strikes, I wonder if the Iranian government would actually get more of a motivation to charge to a bomb, because that is kind of a heightened threat, right? Your security has deteriorated. And I think it is, as much as we all would hate the idea of a nuclear armed Iran, the optics of two nuclear armed states bombing a non-nuclear one, on top of the previous precedent of a nuclear armed state, waging a war against a non-nuclear weapon state now for over 3 years, and the other nuclear states being quite cautious in the way they approach and retaliate, right? Kind of creates this optics in the international sphere that nuclear weapons make a difference, that nuclear weapons do deter, and that you treat a nuclear state differently than a non-nuclear state. And I wonder and I fear that the Iranian government might draw exactly these kinds of lessons.
The British government and the army establishment, they're quite alarmed. And recently there were reports about update, modernize, and develop something new, more modern technologies than it's already UK has. And the generals, they say, well, the security of the world has changed and we need to be prepared and we need to invest into something modern. And they were talking about the creating and testing the new warheads and the missiles, and they're talking about the submarines because this is how the UK carries these missiles. So it seems like 12 days, but it's the nuclear weapon keeps this title of the game changer because it's been game changer as a finishing line of the World War II, and now we're in a new era. Would you agree on that?
Have made a comeback. And they made a comeback not just with this 12 days war, they made a comeback with Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? With the Russian threats, nuclear threats that were profusely used to stave off foreign involvement on the side of Ukraine, right? They were used to induce caution on the part of Ukraine's Western partners and allies, a caution that was practiced by most of those allies and partners. And so it is true that having nuclear weapons gives you certain prerogatives, gives you certain impunity, gives you certain room for maneuver. in this world. Uh, if you're willing to use it and abuse it, as say the Russian Federation has done, of the British military and political establishment, but also the French, who have, a fully indigenous nuclear program in Europe. We're listening to voices coming out of Washington, D.C. saying that the current arsenal is not adequate to deterring basically two peers, near peers, right? Russia and China, that's building up like crazy, right? So we see also with the Chinese buildup that for the first time since in decades, with the number of nuclear warheads consistently going down in the world, even with the appearance of new nuclear states such as India, Pakistan, and North Korea. Their arsenals were not significant to bump the total number of nuclear warheads in the world. We're going to see these numbers go up because of Chinese buildup, because of, rather modest but still increase that the United Kingdom is considering. They're adding a few more warheads to their arsenal. And possible uploading or buildup or increase in the count of nuclear warheads on the US side. Now, that decision hasn't been made, but I think it's fairly likely. Although, President Trump has been surprising in many ways, and he has talked quite a bit about, denuclearization, global, I suppose, and not just unilateral US one. And he is jonesing for a big arms control deal, at least with Russia, but maybe with Russia and China. So we don't know how he would decide on that. So now with everything going on in the Middle East, nuclear weapons are squarely back in the center of international politics, unfortunately.
Do you think in such heated conflict we get very close to actual usage of nuclear weapon?
Well, let's hope not. But nuclear weapons, since their advent in after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which we will commemorate 80 years of that tragedy in August coming up, that the nuclear weapons were seen as weapons that are there to prevent wars rather than to fight wars. And hence the whole practice and doctrine of nuclear deterrence. Now, deterrence is based on a threat of retaliation, in its basic kind of configuration, right? Then you can then stretch it in many different ways, but the basic premise is because there's more than one nuclear armed state in the world, in order to dissuade your adversary from using that nuclear weapon first, you're going to threaten retaliation. And because that person knows, if they ever consider, and use their nuclear weapons, they're going to have an incoming, right? Then they won't do it in the first place. And so it's this delicate balance of terror, as one of the, great theorists of nuclear deterrence has named it. Now, that is not exactly all that has been happening in the nuclear world. We know that from the Cold War, especially the standoff in Europe, where where conventional forces between the Warsaw Pact and NATO back in the day were considered to be at a disadvantage to NATO, right? NATO and the United States have developed plans of use of tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield should the Soviets basically start a major conventional offensive. They knew they couldn't means, and so they would use tactical nuclear weapons against Soviet troops rather early in the conflict. Again, not to exactly obliterate targets as much as to communicate resolve, to say, all right, we are serious about defending this. We're willing to escalate. So, do you really want to go there? Now, that has fortunately never come to pass. On the Soviet side, we know that there have been plans for actually using tactical nuclear weapons to break through fortified enemy, um, uh, enemy fortifications, like hardened fortifications, and defensive positions. So, especially if you're fighting a war somewhere very far from your own borders and your supply lines are stretched, so you could choose to try and transport hundreds of thousands of artillery, conventional artillery shells, or you could just have a dozen nuclear weapons that would do the same job. It's just logistically and number wise, it made sense, so to speak. So not to say that these Cold War plans are still valid. Basically, certainly after the Cold War and in this post-Cold War era, nuclear weapons, their significance in military doctrines normally diminished. Certainly in the United States and less so in Russia. But they were not really considered as war-fighting implements. That kind of changed a little when the war in Ukraine started. And when we got the wind that Russia did consider use of nuclear weapons, it was October 2022. There was this whole big scare where US intelligence got some information that there was a discussion of the use of tactical nuclear weapons against the advancing Ukrainian troops. And then, concomitantly, Russia concocted this whole dirty bomb narrative. If you remember, at the UN, there was this whole like, oh, Ukraine is going to use a dirty bomb. And that was basically nuclear device, right? And that was widely seen as a pretext to then retaliate with a proper nuclear weapon. So it's not so inconceivable that, under certain circumstances, Russia might resort to a use of nuclear weapons, especially given that nuclear deterrence doesn't work in Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have the capacity to threaten a retaliatory nuclear strike. So Ukraine is not covered in any way by nuclear deterrence. So this is a nuclear deterrence vacuum. And in that, it's like one less thing to prevent Russia's nuclear use. Now, they might decide not to use it for other reasons, right? But it's not going to be the failure of deterrence, that's for sure. So we're seeing really a lot of things playing out that we haven't seen before, actually haven't considered before, because we spend so much time thinking about the relationship between two nuclear armed adversaries and how, their threats would be credible and how they need to have a survivable second strike and all this kind of all these theories and all these calculations. And suddenly you have it turns out the likeliest scenario is for a nuclear armed state to use it against a non-nuclear state that's not covered by nuclear deterrence. So, there you have it. Yeah, so fingers crossed, but yeah, I think we're in a different world than we were certainly during the Cold War, and most definitely in the immediate post-Cold War situation.
Your book is going to be available in Ukrainian now, Inheriting the Bomb. And as I said before, and again, it's like such an enjoyable read. And you might think it's just politics or some technical aspects. No, there's a lot of James Bond things, and there's a lot of human side and a lot of warmth. So it's not something you would expect from the academic research, but there are a lot of things you just enjoying as a reader. So I highly recommend to everyone. Um, I guess you're excited. And as you are being a regular visitor to Ukraine and you can observe and see the changes in this discussion in Ukraine, because I remember at the very beginning of the war, there was a lot of speculations about, oh, if we given up or haven't given up the bomb, we would be safe, we would be protected. And I remember how you, in our previous interview on the podcast, how you were giving the context and explaining how important was to actually make that decision for Ukrainian independence and Ukrainian rights to this nuclear weapon and a nuclear bomb. So, do you see the changes of discussion around bomb and Budapest Memorandum in Ukraine, and we was a sort of almost 3.5 years of war?
So it is hard for me to gauge, even though I do travel quite a bit to Ukraine, and I, normally, overhear conversations. I try not to start them because they could turn out to be very long. But need suffice it to say that the knowledge of what had actually happened is rather superficial, both on the popular level and on the kind of more of a political elites level. And that's a function mostly of the fact that this topic has been really neglected. It sort of disappeared from the Ukrainian public arena between 19 and really 2014 by Russia. So there was hardly any discussion of disarmament. There was no historiography to speak of at that time. So no one actually wrote about it from the Ukrainian scholars, or very little. And even decision makers were not privy. Of course, that's a good sign that Ukrainian political environment and system and elites have changed, right? They've renewed themselves. I'm not sure if it's something specifically Ukrainian, probably not. But there is this impulse to start looking for treason and for people who are guilty, right? Like, who betrayed us? Who gave up these weapons? Where are the culprits? Before trying to understand exactly what happened, and if culprits is even the right concept in this story. So I started writing this or researching this project first as my PhD dissertation. I mean, I started it as a PhD project. It was very, very marginal, the whole topic. And then it became more prominent. And as it became more prominent, I found out that, everyone had an opinion about this. Again, and I've found myself more times in a situation where I would mention that I'm researching this to whoever, and then people would start telling me how things happen and how, everyone's been, was corrupt and have given up all the weapons for nothing, and, so much pressure from the outside. And so all these myths, and I would be just there sitting thinking, all right, well, please tell me how this happened. And even today, when the book in English has been out, it has been well received in the United States. And finally, and it's kind of like a dream come true, it has been translated with the help of excellent press, Lokalna Historia, local history from Lviv, my native town, which is even more significant, into Ukrainian. And fantastic translation by Lyudmila Pilaeva. I was able to read this before it went into print, and kind of authorize it. And it's coming out in mid-August, and I wonder how this will be received, because it certainly complicates and introduces a lot of nuance into these very infiltrated, I would say, narratives that are very difficult to dislodge, I find, in Ukrainian public sphere. And even when the announcement of the Ukrainian translation was published, or was posted on Facebook and other social media, you immediately have comments to say, oh, yeah, tell us how we were betrayed. Ukraine's president repeatedly said that, that they came under enormous pressure from the West, which, clearly there are parts of truth in all these statements, but it's interesting that the reaction wasn't like, oh, looking forward to find out more exactly what happened. Everyone already had their opinion. So hopefully, this is not representative of the broader kind of public, and Ukrainians do read, they take keen interest. It's not an easy task to dislodge really deeply internalized, expecting it to be a little bit of a controversial book and read within Ukraine. But all of this is very good because that hopefully will spur public discussion and debate. And this is, it's in these exchanges, these debates that the truths are discovered.
Yes, hopefully. And I think as a war, such horrible time for Ukraine, for Ukrainian society, it also leads to more um, sort of mature perception, own history, own identity, and hopefully more understanding to those decision makers which happened in 90s. And in order to prepare for our today's interview, and I was revising what we talked previous time, looking the book and your recent interview, and again, it's so important to say that all those steps were not betrayal. Yes, giving up nuclear weapon, but it's not something like you were saying, it's not a tank or something which you can grab and use. It's part of the whole system. And even Ukrainian ownership, it was hard task to prove and get something in return making this decision. And those steps were towards Ukrainian independence. Otherwise, Ukraine would still be part of political web of Russia. And it's sort of we have to take context, isn't it?
It's never just a straight shot, right? Like the in history are complicated. And you can always tell. There's a joke, like a political scientist from a historian, when a political scientist will draw for you a 2 by 2 and will say, positive, negative, high, low, and then we'll have like the whole complexity of social reality jammed into like 4 boxes, right? Maybe that kind of reductionism is easier for someone to, organize their thoughts. And there's some value in that. But a historian will always tell you, well, it depends, or it's complicated. And it's often a very unsatisfactory answer, right? But I think it is also closer to the truth. We live in a very complicated world. Even our own lives cannot be put over one person in 4 boxes. So imagine, the life of a country, of a new country that's trying to establish itself as an independent state in the community of states internationally, and has economic problems to deal with. It has political problems to deal with. It has irredentism in Crimea already in 1992, or the the Russian machinations in Crimea. And it has, this nuclear project, to, second one that has a huge leverage over Ukraine, Russia. Ukraine's dependent on energy supplies from Russia. Its economy is still really entangled with Russia before it could really, establish its own economic independence. So Ukraine did find itself in a really difficult situation, and part of the task of a historian, and I think that's what makes for a good work of history, is to find the capacity to have empathy, to really try and put yourself in the situation of that diplomat who sits across the negotiations table with, really savvy and polished and well-funded and well-resourced Americans, right, who have this capacity to push their interests around the world. 1993 is receiving a salary of $40 a month. I mean, he can't go and schmooze with a bunch of diplomats in Geneva, for instance. I mean, one coffee is half of his salary. I mean, I've seen cables at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine where an important message could not be faxed from the ministry to an office in Vienna or Geneva, or forget where, in 1993, an overnight cable, because the missions there, Ukrainian missions there, would and it was not because we were, traitors. It was because this was the reality of our diplomatic corps. We had no money. We had no people who knew anything about nuclear weapons. With that, I think Ukrainian diplomats did an excellent job stepping up to this task under these circumstances. Under the circumstances where fax machines were unplugged because there was no money in the budget, right? Where a Ukrainian diplomat couldn't take his American counterpart or German counterpart and go and schmooze over a coffee because they had a family to, that the price of that coffee was a price of living in Ukraine for a month. So I think we really should be a bit more considerate and give credit where credit's due. This is not to say that there were certainly limitations and certainly mistakes that were made, especially now in retrospect. Now we know, right, that from the perch that we are on now, uh, we can look back and say, wow, if I knew what I knew now, I would have gone back and done this, and so again, I'm hoping that we'll try and impart a bit of that empathy and bring people back to those 90s that were so gladly and for good reason forgotten. But those people who remember those times, they can appreciate that launching a fully fledged nuclear program at that time would have been a really difficult decision, and no political leader would have survived that decision then, in terms of channeling money that were so scarce, so little for civilian programs and for social programs, and the pensions that had to be made, and the wages that arrears that wages weren't paid for half a year. And you take money out of the budget and start enriching uranium and risking it being, sabotaged by the Russians. I mean, that would have been a very difficult decision to make. Now, I would say more important are the decisions that were not made after the disarmament in terms of conventional armaments and in terms of building up some capacity that could have been dual use and could have kept some options for Ukraine open. So that would have been a smart, uh, smart policy, foreign policy, defense policy.
Mariana, thank you very, very much. It's as usual so knowledgeable, so informative, and so exciting. It's just listening to you. It feels like I want more. It's just never enough. Thank you very much, and I remind our viewers there's a book, Inheriting the Bomb in English, and I'll post the link to Amazon or where you can get it. Please do enjoy, and congratulations on Ukrainian edition. And Ukrainian viewers, please check your bookshops. Please check, grab, and enjoy as much as you can. Thank you, Mariana. Thank you. That was Marianna Budjeryn and the author of Inheriting the Bomb. Please do read the book if you haven't. They will give you the whole perspective, the whole context of the Budapest Memorandum and the why and how and who did that decision. And as Mariana pointed out, it was achievement. It was good step, good decision to make at that time for Ukraine, for Ukrainian statehood, Ukrainian independence. Let's see what you think. Please, as usual, I'll ask you to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed, if you found it interesting, please like and share, and let's have discussions. Let's see what's your approach. And if you're from UK or US, share what you think. Do you feel alarmed? Do you think it's a new stage of the dangerous world we're stepping in? If you're from Ukraine, let me know. Have you found the book? Have you read? Or what you think? Has it changed something for you? Invisible became visible, and I'll read everything in the comments. Thank you. I'm Jenny Klochko. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of the podcast. Subscribe if you haven't, and see you next time. Take care.